Alright, you guys, we're back once again here at Reignited, and in this video we are going to continue with our 5.9 Cummins engine rebuild. Stay with me. So it took a few weeks to get all of our parts together, but you can see I have it all here now. We've got the new bearings, new seals, new piston rings, new oil filter, new gaskets, one new connecting rod on there, used crankshaft right here. So in this video we're going to focus on getting the bottom end back together, and we'll see just how far we make it. The very first thing I'm going to do is get these upper main bearings into place. One nice thing about them is that they have a nice little metal tang on them that actually locates them, so you can't put them in backwards. I like to locate the tang side first and then just push the rest of the bearing down the match. Slips right in. This here is your thrust washer bearing. You can see it has the extra sides to it, quite a bit of a shoulder, and that goes in bearing journal number 6. There we go. Bearings are in. We're gonna throw down some assembly lube here. Want to make sure and keep these things nice and lubricated until the engine builds up enough oil pressure on its own. Yeah, there we go. Now let's put these main caps on. I want to go ahead and torque them down to spec and make sure our crank still spins smoothly. Now again, these main bearing caps are stamped what number they are, and I went ahead and took a picture beforehand just to make sure of the orientation of them. And so the stamped number goes to this side of the engine, the oil filter side of the engine. So we'll go ahead and slip that in place. Torque spec for these main bearing caps is in 3 steps. First, it's 37 foot-pounds, then 59 foot-pounds, and then an additional 90 degrees on all of them. So a little bit of a process here, but we'll get our torque down, and then I can spin the crank over and make sure we're still spinning nice and smoothly. It's a good start because it's currently spinning very smoothly. Let's see what happens once I actually get it torqued down. You will have some resistance when you're trying to turn this thing, but it shouldn't be much at all. Okay, look at that. Nice and smooth. Okay, I wanted to do this part on the ground because this crankshaft is obviously very, very heavy, and actually setting it into place if the block was on its side would be very, very difficult. I do not have the proper engine stand for this sort of a thing. I need a really, really beefy engine stand. I don't have one, so I want to do this part of it on the ground so I can get the crank put in there. And as you can see, we're in good shape. I'm spinning it by hand. So now that that's in there, I'm probably gonna put it back up on my bench and then start reassembling it from there. Hopefully it'll give you a little bit better angle from that point as well. Real quick, you guys, before we continue on, I remember in my last Hemi rebuild video that I had a couple of commenters who were saying, why aren't you checking all of your bearing clearances on the engine before you put it back together again? Well, I want to address that right now because same thing on this Cummins engine here. On the Hemi rebuild, it was a stock block, it was a stock crank bearings, all of that. So the factory has already machined everything to fit. Same story in this Cummins engine. This is a stock block, this is a stock crank bearings, all of that. If I were using any sort of aftermarket components here, like an aftermarket crank, or if I was using, if I had done some machining to the block itself or something like that, absolutely I'd be checking my bearing clearances. But as it is, this whole thing was machined for these tolerances to begin with. It's standard size crank bearings, nothing's oversized. I already checked everything to make sure it all matches, we're good. So checking the crank bearing clearances obviously is never a bad thing, and if you have the time to do that, absolutely go for it. But in this case, I certainly feel comfortable just assembling it as is, because again, the block and the crank and everything was already machined for these standard size bearings, which is exactly what I'm using. All right, so 2-stage tightening process on the oil pump bolts here, 6 foot-pounds and then 18 foot-pounds on your second pass. If you guys have been watching the Skid Factory's Cummins build on their channel, you'll know that pretty much all of these smaller bolts get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. Next item on the list, we're gonna go ahead and get this timing case back on here. I need to get this thing all cleaned up, but first I need to put this gasket, which resides behind the case. This is the one I was mentioning that blows out here and over here. So we'll get this thing replaced, get it stuck on there, get the timing cover on there, and then we can put our camshaft back into place. All right, so you notice the gasket just kind of hangs on these little dowel pins right here, kind of keeps it in place. Also notice there's a little bit of some orange sealant that's actually built into the gasket itself, the gasket sealing surface. That gives it some extra protection to keep it from blowing out like the older ones did. So the timing cover is all cleaned up and ready to be reinstalled. As you can see, I don't like to remove the injection pump if I don't have to, so I'll leave the pump gear installed on there. Makes it a bit bulky to work with because it's very lopsided, but honestly, I find it easier than actually pulling the gear off of there and all the pain that comes with that. So anyway, it's all cleaned up, ready to be installed. We have our gasket set in place here, so now let's go ahead and get this thing put on. Now, because I had a couple of weeks between actually tearing this thing down and reassembling it, I went ahead and put all of my fasteners, my hardware in a Ziploc bag and labeled them so I know what was what. Generally, if I can put something back together within, say, a month's period of time, I can generally remember pretty well where all the fasteners go. But if it ends up being longer than that, definitely it's a good idea to go ahead and write things down. All right, we're gonna go ahead and install the rear main seal. Now, this is a factory part, but what's interesting is that it now comes with this wear sleeve that actually goes over the top of the crankshaft itself that the seal rides against. Without this sleeve in here, this seal would not actually touch the surface of the crankshaft. So we're gonna go ahead and try to slip this guy on here, see what it's gonna take to tap it on. Probably gonna take some work to get it on there square. Well, I gotta tell you, that is fascinating. I have not actually done that before. I have replaced this rear main seal before, but I certainly have not done so with a wear sleeve that it has now. Very interesting. Just checking the surface to make sure it's completely flush with the end of the crankshaft. I think we're in good shape, so I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these bolts down. Now remember, these are very small 8mm head bolts, so you don't have to go tightening the heck out of these things. Just snug them down. I'll go through one cycle, just make sure they're snugged up. And I'll go one by one, give them a little tweak there. Just take it easy on them. Don't go cranking away on them. They don't need it. All right, there we go. Rear main seal installed. One reason I want to get the cam installed before I go ahead and flip this thing over is that all of the valve tappets for the camshaft rest inside the block right here. And once I put the camshaft in place, those tappets are going to stay there. Whereas if I'd have just flipped it over as is, all those tappets fall out and then I have to put them all individually back into place. So that's why I'm putting the camshaft in first before I flip it over and put the pistons and rods in there. All right, let's go ahead and get that camshaft all lubed up and installed. Camshaft installed. Timing on the Cummins engine is very, very simple. On the crankshaft, you have a mark on the crankshaft sprocket, then you have a double mark on the camshaft. So it basically goes the crankshaft sprocket directly between those two teeth there. And then as far as injection pump timing, there's not a specific timing procedure on this one, but you can see there is a factory mark there on the pump gear. Go ahead and just line that up with the camshaft, and that basically sets your injection pump timing. So there we go, timing is all set. We'll get this camshaft locked into place. And you guys said these camshaft thrust plate bolts are 18 foot-pounds when you tighten them down. So I'm installing new piston rings on all the pistons. Look at that, comes even numbered. Very nice. So you know which direction they go on. It's nice, even the piston ring is labeled top, so you know which side it goes on, because it does actually have a chamfer here at the bottom edge. That's so as it's coming down, it'll spread out and really seal against the bore, because this is the second ring. So one more thing you want to do once you get all your piston rings on is make sure that all of the ring gaps are not facing each other, that they're all kind of equal distance apart from each other. That'll help to get good sealing. Looks like there is a difference between the top and bottom here, but basically you just line up the tang on there and press it in. All right, we're pretty much ready to install the first piston in there. One thing I like to do is I like to make sure that the crankshaft, that the piston you're installing is as far away from the rod as possible. That way you can really get it fully seated and draw it in towards the actual crankshaft itself. So I went ahead and oiled up this cylinder, put some oil around the piston itself. Now we're ready to install it. There we go. Piston number 1 installed. Let's go ahead and slide it in and get it attached. Once again, make sure you have plenty of assembly lube on all your bearing surfaces. These only go on one way because they're a fractured rod style, but an easy way to know which way is which is that the 2 tangs on the bearings end up together. So in this case, it goes this way. So your connecting rod bolts are kind of interesting. It is 22 foot-pounds, 44 foot-pounds, and an additional 60 degrees rotation to tighten these down. All right, 60 degrees angle. Puts me about 86 foot-pounds. And about 88 on this one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle this engine through one full stroke of the crankshaft, make sure everything spins smooth, and make sure there's no issues before I move on. All right, looks to be good to me. Let's continue on with the rest of the cylinders. I just want to show you guys something I thought was pretty funny. So this is a Hemi piston and rod combination. And we know how good a Hemi engine is. It can hold quite a bit of power, especially if you build it up. But now here is a Cummins piston and rod combination. I mean, look at the size of this connecting rod here comparatively. That is just ridiculous. Anyway, pretty cool to see them side by side like that. All right, if you remember from teardown, this is our number 6 cylinder here, and I don't know if you can really tell, but it's got a ton of color in it right here because it got super, super hot. And so we need to replace this connecting rod. I've got another used one here that's in good shape, so this one's going in. All I gotta do is swap over the circlip from the wrist pin here, slide that guy out of there, slip a new connecting rod in there, we'll be good to go. There we go. All right, we're looking all right. Almost. There we go. Just like that. There we go. All right, as you can see, a pretty simple swap. Got the other connecting rod on there. We'll throw our piston rings in there and our new connecting rod bearings, put it in our final cylinder. Whew, man, that was a process getting all those pistons back in there. But now our full rotating assembly is in there. And again, it's a good idea to go ahead and spin it over. Just make sure everything's free and clear. Now, every piston you install here is going to add a little bit more resistance, so don't be worried about having a little bit more resistance than you had when you started, because now you have all the piston rings applying some friction to their respective cylinders. So obviously your friction is going to increase, therefore the effort is going to increase. But overall, it still feels very, very smooth. There's no tight spots. There's no point where I get to it and all of a sudden it goes and then gets clear after that. So I feel really confident about all the rod caps on there, all the main caps, everything's going good. Now we're going to go and install the main girdle and then the oil pickup tube, and then we're on to the oil pan itself. You know, I gotta say, one of the most satisfying things about working on cars is watching your pile of parts continue to shrink down because you're actually putting everything back together. When you tear these kind of things apart, it can kind of feel like there's parts everywhere. You got them laying here, laying there. Hopefully you have some form of organization there so you know what goes where. But regardless, you got a lot of parts lying around, and it's so satisfying when that pile of parts begins shrinking, 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 and shrinking, because you know you're actually accomplishing something. So I feel pretty good right now. My pile of engine parts has really started to shrink. So we're making some good progress. All right, so on this brace right here, these bolts are torqued down to 32 foot-pounds. Take note when installing this brace that there is one Torx head bolt, and that goes right here next to the oil pump pickup tube. That way it's smaller, it's got a shouldered edge there to clear the oil pump pickup tube itself. So when you're rebuilding an engine that has had a bearing failure like this one, one of the things you really want to do is take your extra time when you're cleaning any components that you're going to be reusing, like this oil pump pickup tube. Obviously, if you get any of that metal right back into the engine, you're right back where you started. We don't want that. So go ahead and make sure you spend a lot of time cleaning this guy out. Make sure it's as good as it can be before you put it back on. All right, I got a brand new oil pump pickup tube gasket here. It is directional, so that's nice. You don't have to worry about which way it goes on. Only goes on one way. Now, if any of you have ever changed a oil pan on these Cummins engine while the engine is still in the truck, you know what a pain in the butt it is to get to all of these bolts for the pickup tube. They're really not a great time. But just like this, boy, it couldn't be easier. Same deal with these two bolts. They are 32 foot-pounds. These ones are 18 foot-pounds. Okay, there we go. Now, I think it's time to go ahead and put our oil pan back on, but I'm gonna need to go ahead and clean that one up. I have not cleaned the oil pan yet, so let's clean the oil pan, get a new gasket, get that guy reinstalled. Well, it's officially do as I say, not as I do. I don't know if it caught that on video. If it did, I'm gonna laugh. But you know, I kept saying, make sure that the bolt is actually going through the gasket. Well, I probably should have paid more attention to that myself. Got that fixed. That obviously would have been a catastrophic mistake to not have my oil pickup tube gasket in there. That'll cause all sorts of low pressure issues and cause the exact same problem that I was just fixing. So let's not do that. Got that all fixed, got the oil pan all cleaned up. It's all spick and span now, ready to go. Let's go ahead and slap that baby on here. Another quick tip for you guys, when it comes to the oil pan gasket here, if you are doing this in the truck, a good way to do this is to go ahead and use some gasket sealant to actually bond the gasket to the pan itself. If you put it in there just dry like this and try to actually get it to all line up, it just falls down in there, and it makes life harder than it has to be. So go ahead and use some gasket sealant, seal it to the actual surface of the pan, wait for it to dry. I'm talking like the spray kind of adhesive. Use the spray adhesive on there, attach it on there, let it dry or tack up enough to where it's not gonna move around on you, and then install the pan. Makes life way easier. In this case, because it's all right here, I'm not too worried about it. Oh man, whew, that was definitely a full day's work. You wouldn't think it would take that long to get all this stuff together, but honestly, I'm just going slow. I like to take my time a little bit and make sure I'm doing everything as accurately as I can. So we got basically our whole entire short block together. I still had to put the timing cover plate on with the new front crank seal. Still had to put the trans adapter on with the flex plate, but it's pretty much ready to drop back into the frame. And that's something you're gonna see on the next episode. So that's gonna be it for this one, you guys. I really appreciate you watching as always. If you wanna follow me on Instagram, it's at reignited.tx. We have a bunch of other videos, a bunch of other automotive content, a lot more Hemi content if that's more your thing. I've got a 6.4 Hemi Swap C10 if you want to check that out. There's gonna be videos popping up here, there, everywhere. We do have t-shirts available, reignitedtx.com if you want to check that out and support the channel. But that's gonna be it for this time, you guys. So we'll see you next time on Reignited.